So, imagine sitting in a prison cell, just completely stripped of your freedom, and you've been convicted of a crime for, well, basically just liking and forwarding a few posts on Twitter.
Right, which is just, it's a terrifying thought.
Totally. Now imagine taking the exact legal documents that put you in that cell and feeding them into like four of the world's most advanced AI models.
Oh, yeah.
And then asking those AIs to ruthlessly audit the judge, the prosecutor, and, the police who put you there. That is exactly the experiment we are running today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking a highly complex, really murky legal case from China and running it through ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, and Gemini.
It's basically the ultimate stress test for artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
I mean, we're asking these models to act as objective legal analysts in a space that is usually just totally dominated by human bias, political pressure, and, well, really emotional arguments.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to explore how these different models independently synthesize the case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan. We're looking at a guy who went from being a criminal defendant in a cell to suddenly accusing the entire judicial apparatus of systemic, coordinated crimes.
But before we jump into this powder keg of a case, we really need to pause for a crucial disclaimer. The source documents we are diving into today contain highly politically charged material.
Yeah, very much so.
And we want to make it abundantly clear to you, the listener, that we are absolutely not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints found in the original documents. We're not endorsing the positions of the Chinese government, nor are we, validating the counter-accusations of Dr. Chen.
Right. Our sole objective today is to impartially report on the content provided in these documents.
Yeah.
We're looking strictly at how these four AI models evaluated the text from a legal, logical, and, analytical standpoint. We were just letting the algorithms do the talking.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get to Dr. Chen's explosive counter-accusations against the state, we first need to understand the baseline. Why was he in prison in the first place, and how did the AIs evaluate that initial conviction?
Well, looking at the facts provided to the AI models, Dr. Chen was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison in Kunming, China. And the formal charge was picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Right.
That falls under Article 293 of the Chinese criminal law. But the alleged criminal behavior itself was incredibly specific. It was literally just forwarding and liking political, historical, and artistic content on Twitter.
Forwarding and liking tweets. I mean, that is the entire basis for a nearly 2-year prison sentence.
Yeah, pretty wild.
I'm guessing our 4 AI models had a field day dissecting the legal mechanics of that conviction, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was total consensus across the board. ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and DeepSeek all independently found the initial conviction to be just highly problematic based on the court documents provided.
Wow, all 4 of them.
Yeah, all of them. They broke down the application of Article 293 into 3 essential legal elements that a prosecutor actually has to prove to secure a conviction.
Okay, what are they?
First, they have to prove the spread of fake news or, fabricated information. Second, they must prove subjective intent, meaning the defendant actually knew the information was fake but maliciously spread it anyway. And third, the action must cause severe social disorder.
So if the prosecution fails to objectively prove even one of those pillars, the whole charge should theoretically just collapse.
Exactly.
Let's look at that first pillar, the spread of fake news. The documents mention Dr. Chen was sharing art, historical documents, and personal opinions. How does an AI, which obviously relies on hard data, evaluate whether a piece of art is fake news?
Well, when an AI evaluates text for fabricated information, it runs into a hard boundary with subjective expression. ChatGPT pointed out that, artistic expression and personal opinion simply cannot be legally proven fake.
Because they're subjective.
Right. They don't possess the characteristic of being a verifiable objective fact. An LLM parses statements into categories of falsifiability. You can prove a statement about a stock price is false.
Sure.
But you cannot legally or logically prove that a historical interpretation or a piece of political art is fabricated information because art operates on subjectivity. So the models concluded that the content Dr. Chen shared legally cannot meet the statutory requirement of the first element.
Okay, so they failed on the very first hurdle, and if the information isn't objectively fake, proving his malicious intent to spread fake news becomes kind of impossible.
Yeah, it falls apart.
Which brings us to the third element, severe social disorder. I'm guessing forwarding a few tweets to a small follower count didn't exactly incite a massive riot in the streets of Kunming.
Not at all. Gemini and Copilot were incredibly clinical about analyzing that specific causality. Judicial interpretations of Article 293 require objective, measurable consequences.
Like what?
Well, the law specifically mentions sparking a mass incident, causing public panic, or severely disrupting public order. The AIs analyzed the metrics provided in the documents, and, well, Dr. Chen had a minuscule number of followers, and his retweets had virtually zero public engagement.
So nobody even saw them, really.
Exactly. The models concluded that the required harmful consequence to society simply didn't exist in the evidentiary record. There was no causal link between a liked tweet and any actual social disruption.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The court actually tried to justify that second element, his subjective intent, using his education level.
Oh, right. This part was wild.
Yeah. The court documents claim that because Dr. Chen is highly educated, like he holds a PhD, he should have been able to distinguish right from wrong, and therefore he must have known the information was harmful.
Yeah.
It sounds like the court used a reverse halo effect. It's like saying because someone has a PhD in physics, they must have intentionally caused a car crash because they understand velocity. I mean, does that actually hold up in a courtroom?
Definitely not. Gemini and ChatGPT flagged that specific logic as a glaring violation of the presumption of innocence. You simply cannot use a person's educational background, their intelligence, or their profession to substitute for hard, objective evidence of criminal intent.
It's just absurd.
It is. The models actually classified this legal maneuver as a subjective presumption. By relying on his PhD rather than behavioral evidence, the court demonstrated a fundamental failure of evidence-based judgment.
So the AI models are looking at the original charge and seeing a complete and utter collapse of evidentiary standards. The pillars of the conviction just do not exist.
Nope.
And Dr. Chen clearly saw it too. He didn't just accept this flawed conviction, he used it as fuel. Sitting in a prison cell, he drafts this massive counterattack against the state, which he calls his blood letter.
Yeah, that document is intense.
It really is. It flips the entire dynamic of the case. We shift from his alleged crimes to his accusations against the very authorities who locked him up.
Right, in this document, he accuses the police, the prosecutors, and the judges of a systemic setup. He alleges they acted in a coordinated manner to frame him.
Wow.
And when the AIs process these new explosive accusations, they immediately sorted them into two distinct legal buckets: procedural violations and severe criminal acts.
Okay, let's separate those buckets. On the procedural side, he's alleging things like the police showing up to detain him with no search warrants, no arrest warrants, and failing to notify his family for days.
Right, which are serious administrative and procedural flaws. They violate the criminal procedure law. But the AIs differentiate those administrative failures from his second bucket of accusations, which cross the line into severe direct criminal behavior by state officials.
Right, like the abuse claims.
Yeah. Dr. Chen claims he was illegally detained, subjected to exhausting interrogations, deliberately denied food and access to a toilet, and even physically beaten by officers to force him to hand over his device passwords.
That escalates things from a paperwork error to egregious human rights violations. How do the AI models process claims of torture? Like, do they just accept the accusations at face value?
Not at all. DeepSeek and Copilot applied a very strict legal framework here. They noted that if these specific allegations of violence and coercion are true, they directly violate multiple statutes.
Like which ones?
Most notably, Article 24(7, which explicitly criminalizes extracting confessions by torture, and Article 399, which targets judicial officers who bend the law for personal gain or to intentionally frame an innocent person. But, the models issued a massive legal caution here.
They need the receipts.
Precisely. They strictly caution that these are currently just allegations. The AIs point out that while the claims match the legal definitions of these severe crimes perfectly, moving from an accusation to a conviction requires objective proof.
So the AI can't just play judge and jury.
Exactly. An LLM evaluating a text can say, yes, this description meets the criteria of Article 247. But a court requires medical records of injuries sustained in custody, testimonies from cellmates, or interrogation room video footage. An accusation alone, no matter how detailed or horrifying, just cannot legally stand without corroborating evidence.
Right. But there is one detail in Dr. Chen's letter that made me stop in my tracks.
Oh, the prosecutor's comment.
Yes. He claims that during his trial, a prosecutor named Jeb Bin actually stated in open court that they, quote, didn't verify the evidence and didn't plan to. Wait, if a prosecutor actually admits on the record that they intentionally ignored the evidence, isn't that essentially a verbal confession to dereliction of duty?
Yeah, Gemini and ChatGPT zeroed in on that exact statement. According to the models, a prosecutor's core statutory duty is to verify facts and laws objectively.
Obviously.
So if a prosecutor states openly that they intentionally bypassed that foundational step, the AIs validate that it would constitute the crimes of dereliction of duty and abuse of power.
The way the AI separates this is so fascinating. It's telling us, like, missing a signature on a warrant is a procedural flaw. It's bad administration.
Right.
But a prosecutor intentionally ignoring evidence to push a case forward, that crosses a hard legal line into actual criminal behavior by the official.
Exactly. The AI acts as an emotionless sorting mechanism, untangling administrative rule-breaking from actual statutory crimes. But, Dr. Chen's letter goes beyond accusing him of standard corruption.
Oh, yeah.
He deploys this brilliant legal and philosophical argument to actually turn their own charges against them.
This was absolutely the most compelling part of the source material. It's this philosophical legal flip. Let's break down Dr. Chen's logic here because it is razor sharp. He basically holds up a mirror to the court.
He really does. Dr. Chen's argument operates on the exact logic used to convict him. He says, let's look at the standard you use to find me guilty of picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Okay.
The authorities establish that the standard is simply fabricating information that causes a breakdown in social order and trust.
And he says, okay, if that is your standard, let's apply it to your own actions.
Right.
He argues that the police and prosecutors fabricated evidence against him, created false judicial documents, and then published those false official documents online for the public to see.
Yeah, and the implications of that are huge.
Exactly. Therefore, he argues, their actions fit the criteria of the crime far better than his retweets ever did. Official documents hold actual weight, so faking them causes real social disorder.
ChatGPT categorized this argumentative strategy brilliantly. It labeled it a reductio ad absurdum or a normative consistency test. Essentially, it's a mirror test.
I love that term.
Right. The AI points out that this argument ruthlessly exposes a massive double standard in how the law is being applied by the state.
Gemini's take on this was incredibly insightful, too, I thought. It pointed out the deep, dark irony of the situation. A public order law that was specifically designed to stop regular citizens from spreading internet rumors is allegedly being used by government officials to spread official rumors through weaponized legal documents.
The irony is just palpable.
So it's like a referee handing out a red card to a soccer player for a minor foul, and the player holds up a rulebook and says, well, actually, by your own definition of a foul, you're the one who just ruined the entire game.
That's a perfect way to put it.
The logic is deeply satisfying, but I do have to ask, does this mirror test actually work in a real courtroom? Like, can you actually charge a judge with picking quarrels for writing a bad verdict?
Well, as logically satisfying as the argument is, the expert analysis from ChatGPT explains why it actually fails strictly as a matter of criminal law.
Ah, of course.
Yeah, it comes down to a fundamental principle of jurisprudence, known in Latin as lex specialis.
Okay, let me see if I can translate the legal jargon here. It feels like charging a bank robber with trespassing. Like, sure, they technically trespassed into the bank vault, but there's a much more specific, severe crime happening that supersedes the trespassing charge. Is that the idea behind lex specialis?
That is the exact mechanism of specific laws supersede general ones. Picking quarrels and provoking trouble is a general catch-all public order charge meant for civilian disruption.
Right.
But judicial officials hold a specialized role with immense power. If they intentionally fabricate evidence and issue false verdicts, they're committing highly specialized crimes unique to their positions of authority.
Because they aren't just civilians causing a ruckus, they are actual agents of the state abusing their specific power.
Right. They wouldn't be charged with a general public order offense. They would be charged under specific statutes governing official misconduct, such as abuse of power, or a specific Chinese law translated as bending the law for personal gain or perverting the course of justice.
Got it.
The AI models agree that as a matter of strict statutory law, charging a prosecutor with picking quarrels is technically legally incorrect.
So the referee, in my analogy, has their own special set of referee-specific laws they'd be prosecuted under. The player's rulebook doesn't apply to them in the same way.
Correct. However, as a philosophical critique of systemic hypocrisy, all the models agree. Dr. Chen's argument is just incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
It forces the system to look at its own normative consistency. It highlights that the state is engaging in the exact behavior it claims to be punishing.
But Dr. Chen doesn't let up. because he perceives that the authorities, the police, the prosecutors, and the judges allegedly acted together across different departments to bend these rules and ignore the lack of evidence. He escalates his claim to the highest possible level.
He really goes for it.
He accuses the judicial apparatus of being a structural evil force. He actually claims they acted as a coordinated mafia or black society.
And this is where we see the AI models really flexing their analytical neutrality. Evaluating a highly emotional, politically charged claim like the judicial system is a mafia requires stripping away all the rhetoric and looking purely at statutory definitions.
Right, getting past the anger.
DeepSeek, Copilot, and ChatGPT all applied China's anti-organized crime law to Dr. Chen's claim to see if it actually legally held water.
Because if a group of powerful people are all working together across departments to do something illegal, how is that not an organized crime syndicate? What was the AI's verdict on that?
They concluded that the claim doesn't legally hold up.
Really?
Yeah. While systemic judicial cooperation to frame an innocent person is a horrific abuse of power, it doesn't automatically meet the strict legal definition of a mafia.
Why not?
Well, the legal definition of a mafia or black society typically requires proof of an ongoing, profit-driven criminal enterprise that seeks to violently or economically control a specific sector of society.
Ah, so it all comes down to the underlying motive. A mafia operates for illegal profit and territorial control.
The underlying motive is exactly the dividing line. A group of judicial officials coordinating to secure a wrongful conviction might be doing so due to intense political pressure, career advancement, or, trying to meet conviction quotas. That is a terrible perversion of justice, but it lacks the profit-driven underworld control elements of a mafia. So the AIs conclude it is much more accurately classified legally as a systemic risk of judicial misconduct or joint dereliction of duty.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about the nuanced legal difference between a mafia and systemic misconduct? I mean, to the guy sitting in the prison cell, it all feels equally bad.
It does. But the words we use matter immensely because accurate legal definitions dictate how a society actually fixes its broken systems.
How so?
If you call the court a mafia, that is an emotional rhetorical framing that sounds good in a protest, but it doesn't offer a legal remedy. But if you call it systemic dereliction of duty or abuse of power, you are using the actual language of the law. And that provides a concrete, actionable roadmap for internal investigation and reform. A higher court can prosecute dereliction of duty. They can investigate a breakdown in judicial independence. The AI's greatest strength here is stripping away the emotional heat to find the actionable legal reality.
It takes the anger out of the equation and leaves only the mechanics of the law.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, there was a really fascinating psychological analysis buried in the case files we reviewed. What did the models pull from that regarding Dr. Chen's mindset?
Oh, what's fascinating here is the resilience required to mount this kind of defense. The analysis looks at the very fact that Dr. Chen was able to maintain this rigorous analytical fight, drafting these incredibly complex legal and philosophical arguments from inside a highly restricted prison environment.
It's unbelievable, honestly.
It proves that intrinsic motivation, the internal psychological pursuit of truth and justice, can survive even the most severe external control. His physical environment was entirely locked down, but his cognitive drive to dismantle the logic of his captors could not be caged.
That is just profound, to be locked up, physically constrained, facing the weight of the entire state, but your mind is still operating at a level where you are inventing things like the normative consistency test to legally trap the people who put you there. It's just a testament to the sheer force of human intellect when it's backed into a corner.
It speaks volumes about the resilience of the human mind when driven by a search for justice, regardless of the physical or political circumstances.
Let's bring this all together. We set out on a mission today to see what happens when you feed a highly complex, emotionally and politically charged legal case into 4 of the world's most advanced AI models.
Right.
We really wanted to see if they could act as an unbiased diagnostic tool in a very muddy landscape.
And what we found is that the AIs were able to act as a highly effective, incredibly precise filter. They objectively dissected the case, maintaining a neutral analytical lens the entire time.
Which is hard for humans to do.
Exactly. They proved that AI can separate procedural administrative errors, like missing signatures on a warrant, from actual criminal acts, like alleged torture or prosecutors intentionally ignoring evidence.
They successfully separated philosophical arguments from statutory law, too. They appreciated the sheer brilliance of Dr. Chen's mirror test, while correctly identifying the lex specialis principle that explains why it wouldn't result in a specific criminal charge.
Yeah.
And they separated emotional rhetoric, like calling the court a mafia, from the actionable legal definition of systemic misconduct.
Human legal systems, by their very nature, are run by humans. And humans are messy, biased, and deeply susceptible to pressure. The diagnostic landscape of justice can get incredibly murky.
Totally.
But these large language models demonstrated a unique ability to look at that human chaos, instantly spot the logical fallacies, identify the double standards, and highlight the exact statutes being violated.
So here is a final thought for you to mull over today. We are watching artificial intelligence evolve at a breakneck pace. If these models are already capable of this level of objective, cold, precise legal analysis, finding the cracks in an entire judicial system's logic, well, will we one day see a world where defense attorneys or even judges are required to run their cases through an AI consensus?
It really raises an important question for the future of law. Could an AI become the ultimate safeguard? A tool used not to replace human judgment, but to mathematically prove when a legal system is failing its own citizens.
That's a wild thought.
Imagine a courtroom where you don't just appeal your case to a higher human judge with their own set of biases, but you appeal to the algorithms. If a machine can highlight a broken law with zero bias, perhaps that is the ultimate check on human power.
Something to think about the next time you hear about a controversial verdict. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.